Before diving into these forgotten seekers of history's shadows, imagine this. What if everything you knew about one of history's most powerful military orders was a lie? What if their downfall wasn't about heresy or corruption, but about a king's desperate need for gold and revenge? If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. Today, we uncover the real charges against the Knights Templar. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Paris like a shroud, and in the shadows of Notre Dame, whispers carried on the October wind of 1307. Brother Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, knelt in prayer before the altar of the Temple Church, unaware that this would be his final dawn as a free man. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of crusading battles, clasped together in devotion to a god who seemed increasingly distant from the political machinations swirling around his ancient order. The Templars had once been the sword arm of Christendom, warrior monks who carved their legend in the blood-soaked sands of the Holy Land. For 2 centuries, they had stood as guardians of pilgrimage routes, bankers to kings, and keepers of secrets that could topple kingdoms. Their white mantles bearing the distinctive red cross had become symbols of both salvation and terror, depending on which side of their blade you found yourself. But now, in the heart of France, their greatest enemy was not a Saracen warrior or an infidel army. King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, for his striking appearance rather than his character, had set his cold, calculating eyes upon the Templars' vast wealth and influence. His royal coffers were empty, his debts crushing, and his pride wounded by the order's independence from his authority. As Brother Jacques rose from his prayers, the heavy wooden doors of the temple groaned open, and the sound of marching feet echoed through the sacred halls. Steel boots struck stone in rhythmic precision, and the jingle of chainmail announced the arrival of royal guards. The Grand Master turned, his grey eyes meeting the stern faces of men he had once considered allies. In that moment, he understood that the true trial of the Templars had begun. Captain Guillaume de Nogaret, King Philip's ruthless chancellor, stepped forward from the shadows of the temple, his black robes rustling like raven wings. His pale, angular face bore the expression of a man who had grown comfortable with necessary cruelties, and his thin lips curved into what might have been mistaken for a smile, if not for the ice in his dark eyes. Behind him, the royal guards formed a semicircle, their hands resting on sword hilts with practiced ease. Brother Jacques, Nogaret's voice carried the authority of the crown, each word precisely measured. By order of His Most Christian Majesty Philip IV, you and all members of your order within the realm of France are hereby arrested on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and crimes against the natural order of God and man. The Grand Master's weathered face remained impassive, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the altar. Around the temple, other Templars had been roused from their morning prayers and duties. Brother Geoffroy de Charny, the order's preceptor of Normandy, stepped protectively beside his leader, his hand instinctively reaching for a sword that was no longer at his side. The irony was not lost on any of them. These men who had spent their lives as warriors now stood defenseless in their own sanctuary. "What specific crimes do you accuse us of?" Jacques asked, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. He had faced down Mamluk armies and survived the fall of Acre, but this felt different, more dangerous because it came cloaked in the language of law and righteousness. Nogaret unrolled a parchment, its wax seal bearing the royal arms. Idol worship, denial of Christ, obscene rituals, and corruption of holy vows. His eyes glittered with satisfaction as he spoke each accusation. The king has evidence of your order's secret practices. Brother Geoffroy de Charnay, his scarred face flushed with indignation, took a step forward before Jacques de Molay's restraining hand fell upon his shoulder. At 45, Geoffroy still carried the bearing of the seasoned warrior he had been in the Holy Land, his broad shoulders and calloused hands, testament to years wielding sword and shield in service to Christ. His brown eyes blazed with barely contained fury as he stared at Nogaret. "These accusations are fabrications," Geoffroy declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We have served God and Christendom for 2 centuries. Our blood has watered the soil of Jerusalem. Our gold has funded crusades. Our lives have been given in service to the Church." Other Templars throughout the temple began to murmur, their voices rising in protest. Brother Raoul de Gizy, keeper of the temple's treasury, shook his greying head in disbelief. Brother Henri de Chalon, barely past his 20th year and newly sworn to the order, looked between his elders with confusion and growing fear. The youngest among them had never known defeat or disgrace, only the glory stories of their predecessors' victories in the East. Nogaret's smile widened, revealing teeth stained yellow by wine and age. "Your protestations only confirm what we have long suspected. The order has become corrupt, drunk on its own power and wealth. The king has witnesses who will testify to your blasphemous practices. Former brothers who have confessed to participating in rituals that would make demons blush." The Grand Master felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. He thought of the thousands of brothers who had died defending the Christian settlements in Outremer, of the pilgrims who had safely traversed dangerous roads under Templar protection, of the loans that had kept kingdoms solvent and crusades funded. How had it come to this? In the royal palace of the Ile de la Cité, King Philip IV stood before a massive window overlooking the Seine, his reflection ghost-like in the morning-stained glass. At 39, he possessed the classical beauty that had earned him his epithet. Golden hair that caught the light like spun metal, features carved with aristocratic precision, and pale blue eyes that seemed to hold the chill of winter. But those who knew him well understood that his beauty masked a mind as sharp and merciless as any blade forged in his armories. "Is it done?" Philip asked without turning, his voice carrying the authority of absolute monarchy. Behind him, his advisors stood in respectful silence, their morning council interrupted by this moment that would reshape the political landscape of Europe. A messenger, still breathing hard from his ride, knelt on one knee. "Your Majesty, Chancellor Nogaret reports the arrests proceed as planned. Grand Master de Molay and over 600 Templars are now in custody throughout the kingdom." Philip's lips curved in satisfaction. For months, he had laid the groundwork for this day, planting loyal men within the Templar ranks, gathering testimonies from disgruntled former brothers, and most importantly, securing the reluctant cooperation of Pope Clement V. The pontiff's weakness had been evident from the moment Philip had engineered his election, moving the papacy from Rome to Avignon, where it could be properly supervised. "And the treasure?" Philip inquired, finally turning from the window, his pale eyes fixed on the messenger with predatory intensity. The royal treasury was nearly bankrupt from expensive wars in Flanders, and the Templars' legendary wealth represented salvation for his financial woes. "The temple vaults are being inventoried as we speak, Your Majesty. Though preliminary reports suggest..." The messenger hesitated, swallowing nervously. "Suggest what?" Philip's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. The messenger's face paled as he delivered news that would enrage the king. "Sire, the main treasury vaults appear to have been emptied. Days ago, perhaps weeks. Only ledgers and a few ceremonial items remain." The man's voice grew smaller with each word, as if he could somehow diminish the impact of his report through volume alone. Philip's beautiful features transformed, his jaw clenching until muscles stood out like cords along his neck. The advisors in the room seemed to hold their collective breath, knowing well their sovereign's terrible rages. When the king's anger was roused, heads had a tendency to part company with shoulders. Emptied? Philip's voice remained deceptively calm, but those who knew him recognized the warning in his tone. 600 knights arrested, yet somehow their vast fortunes simply vanished? Did these warrior monks sprout wings and fly their gold to safety? Brother Esquin de Floiran, a former Templar who had become Philip's most valuable informant, shifted uncomfortably in his position among the royal advisors. His treachery had bought him a place at court, but he understood better than anyone the order's capacity for cunning. "Your Majesty," he ventured carefully, "the Templars have always been masters of finance and logistics. Their network extends far beyond France, to England, Germany, the Holy Land." Philip whirled on him, those ice-blue eyes blazing. "Are you suggesting they somehow anticipated our move? That someone warned them?" The implication hung in the air like a sword suspended by the finest thread. If there had been a leak, if someone in Philip's inner circle had betrayed the secret. The king's gaze swept the room, studying each face with the intensity of a hawk examining potential prey. Every man present felt the weight of that scrutiny, understanding that their lives now hung in the balance of their sovereign's paranoia. In the depths of the temple fortress, Grand Master Jacques de Molay sat in chains within a dank stone cell that reeked of centuries of despair. The iron shackles around his wrists and ankles bore the weight of more than just metal. They carried the crushing realization that his life's work now lay in ruins. Water dripped steadily from somewhere in the darkness above, each drop marking time like a funeral bell. Brother Geoffroy de Charny occupied the adjacent cell, separated by thick stone walls but close enough that their voices could carry in whispered conversations. Their captors had been efficient, stripping them of their white mantles and leaving them in simple brown robes that marked them as common prisoners rather than knights of a holy order. "Jacques," Geoffroy's voice carried through the stone, hoarse from hours of prayer and lamentation. "Do you think they truly found evidence against us? Or are these merely the fabrications of desperate men?" The Grand Master closed his eyes, remembering the faces of the brothers throughout Europe who had devoted their lives to the Order's mission. "I have searched my heart, my memories of our rituals and practices, and I find nothing that warrants these charges. But Philip cares nothing for truth, only for gold and political advantage." Above them, they could hear the heavy boots of guards and occasional shouts as more Templars were dragged to cells. The sound of weeping filtered through the walls. Young brothers who had expected to spend their lives in honored service now faced an uncertain and terrifying future. Many had never experienced anything but the structured, purposeful existence of the Order. "They will try to break us," Jacques continued, his voice gaining strength. "They will use pain, fear, and false promises to extract confessions that will justify their theft of our property and destruction of our brotherhood." Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu, nephew of the legendary former Grand Master of the same name, pressed his young face against the cold iron bars of his cell window. At 24, he had joined the Order seeking glory and purpose, inspired by tales of his uncle's heroic defense of Acre. Now those dreams crumbled like sand between his fingers as he watched royal officials systematically looting the temple's sacred chambers. Men in the king's livery hauled away chalices, religious manuscripts, and architectural plans of Templar holdings across Europe. Each stolen item represented years of careful accumulation and sacred purpose, reduced now to mere inventory in Philip's desperate quest for solvency. Guillaume's young hands gripped the bars until his knuckles showed white against the iron. In the cell beside him, Brother Pierre de Bologna, an Italian knight who had come to Paris on diplomatic mission, muttered prayers in his native tongue. At 52, Pierre had survived the final battles for the Holy Land and the bitter retreat from Outremer. His weathered face bore the resigned expression of a man who had seen too many defeats. but his dark eyes still burned with undiminished faith. "They take our possessions," Pierre said quietly, "but they cannot steal our souls or our dedication to Christ. These are the actions of bandits, not Christian kings." Guillaume's youthful idealism warred with growing despair. "But Master Pierre, if the Pope himself sanctions these proceedings, how can we be certain of our righteousness? What if there is truth in some of the accusations?" The older knight's voice hardened with conviction. "I have served this order for 28 years, boy. I have witnessed our rituals, lived by our rules, fought beside our brothers. If there is corruption, it exists not in our hearts, but in the hearts of those who accuse us for their own gain." Master Guillaume de Plaisillon, Philip's royal prosecutor, entered the dungeons with the confidence of a man who had built his career on the destruction of others. His sharp, ferret-like features were accentuated by a pointed beard and cold, calculating eyes that missed nothing. In his hands, he carried a leather satchel containing documents that would serve as both weapons and shields in the legal battle to come. Behind him walked Brother Esquien de Floiran, whose betrayal of his former brothers had purchased him freedom and gold, though not peace of mind. Esquin's face bore the haggard look of a man haunted by his choices, his nervous gestures betraying the inner turmoil that no amount of royal favour could silence. "Grand Master," Plaisians announced with mock courtesy, "I bring greetings from His Majesty and an opportunity for redemption. Confess to the charges against your order, and you may yet save your brothers from the harshest consequences of your crimes." Jacques de Molay raised his eyes to study his tormentor. "Master Plaisians, I have served God faithfully for over 40 years. I will not bear false witness against myself or my brothers to satisfy a king's greed." Plaisians smiled with the practiced cruelty of a man who enjoyed his work. "Your former brother Esquin here has provided us with detailed testimony about the Order's secret rituals. Shall I read some of his more colourful descriptions?" Esquin shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet the Grand Master's gaze. His guilt was palpable, radiating from him like heat from a forge. The 30 pieces of silver had brought Judas only temporary satisfaction, and Esquin was learning that same bitter lesson. "Lies purchased with gold carry no weight in God's court," Jacques replied quietly, "though they may suffice for earthly tribunals corrupted by political ambition." Queen Joan of Navarre paced the private chambers of her apartment in the royal palace, her silk gown rustling with each agitated step. Beautiful and intelligent, she possessed the political acumen that came from being born to rule Navarre in her own right before her marriage to Philip. Her dark hair was braided with gold thread, and her expressive brown eyes showed concern that went far deeper than mere wifely duty. "My lord," she addressed Philip as he entered their chamber, his face still bearing the flush of anger from his confrontations with advisers. "The arrests have caused great unrest among our nobles. Many question the wisdom of attacking an order blessed by the Church for 2 centuries. Philip loosened his golden hair from its formal arrangement, allowing it to fall around his shoulders. Even in private, he remained achingly beautiful, but Joan had learned to read the dangerous currents beneath that perfect exterior. "The Templars have grown too powerful, too independent. They answer to no earthly authority, maintain their own armies, control vast wealth. Such power in hands not sworn to the crown represents a threat to the kingdom itself." Joan moved closer, her voice dropping to the intimate tone reserved for their private conversations. "But husband, Pope Clement has expressed private reservations about the proceedings. If the Church withdraws its support, Clement will support whatever course ensures the papacy remains in Avignon rather than Rome." Philip replied with cold certainty. "I hold the keys to his security, and he knows it well." The Queen's concern deepened. She had heard whispers from her network of court ladies about the interrogation methods being employed in the temple dungeons. The screams that echoed through the fortress walls at night suggested that Philip's quest for confessions was taking a particularly brutal turn. Character appearance: Queen Joan of Navarre. Beautiful woman with dark hair braided with gold, expressive brown eyes, wearing silk gown with intricate embroidery, carries herself with royal dignity and intelligence. The screams from the torture chamber below the temple fortress pierced the night air like arrows of despair. Brother Raoul de Gizy, once keeper of the order's treasury, writhed in agony as red-hot irons seared his feet. The royal torturers, led by Master Jean de Jamville, worked with methodical precision born of years, serving the crown's darker purposes. "Confess!" Jamville demanded, his scarred face impassive as he heated another iron in the glowing brazier. "Tell us about the idol called Baphomet that your order worships. Describe the obscene kisses exchanged during your secret ceremonies." Raoul's voice emerged as a broken whisper between gasps of pain. There is no idol, no obscene practices. We are servants of Christ." Above the torture chamber in his cell, Grand Master Jacques de Molay listened to his brother's suffering with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Each scream drove daggers into his heart, making him question whether his determination to maintain their innocence was worth the price his brothers paid in flesh and agony. Brother Geoffroy de Charny's voice carried through the stone walls, reciting prayers loud enough to partially mask the sounds from below. Pater noster qui es in caelis. His Latin words rose and fell like a protective incantation, offering what small comfort prayer could provide in this hellish place. In another cell, young Guillaume de Beaujeu pressed his hands over his ears, his young mind reeling from the reality of torture. The glorious crusading order he had joined bore no resemblance to this nightmare of political persecution and manufactured evidence. His faith in the righteousness of their cause remained unshaken, but his faith in earthly justice crumbled with each passing hour. The torturers worked in shifts, ensuring that the screams continued throughout the night. A symphony of suffering designed to break the will of every Templar within hearing. Dawn broke grey and cheerless over Paris, casting pale light through the narrow windows of the Templar fortress. Brother Henri de Chalon, the youngest of the arrested knights at barely 21, sat in his cell with wide, haunted eyes. The sounds of torture had continued throughout the night, and his youthful face had aged years in a matter of hours. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon arrived with fresh documents, his satisfaction evident as he reviewed the confessions extracted through pain and terror. Several younger knights had broken under torture, signing statements they could barely read through tears and trauma. Their confessions spoke of heretical practices, blasphemous rituals, and corruption that existed only in the fevered imagination of their accusers. "You see," Plaisillon addressed the Grand Master through the cell bars, "your brothers begin to see reason. Brother Antoine de Sivry has confessed to spitting on the cross during his initiation. Brother Claude de Givry admits to worshipping a bearded idol. Surely you can spare the remaining brothers such suffering by acknowledging the truth yourself." Jacques de Molay's grey eyes blazed with fury and heartbreak. Those young men would confess to being the devil himself if it would stop the pain you inflict upon them. Their words, purchased with agony, mean nothing before God or any righteous tribunal. In the cell beside him, Brother Geoffroy maintained his dignity despite the psychological torture. "Master Plaisillons," he called out, his voice steady despite circumstances. "When you stand before the Almighty's judgment, will you defend these methods? Will you claim that truth emerges from red-hot iron and broken bones?" The prosecutor's smile remained unchanged. "I serve earthly justice and the Crown's authority. Your God, if he exists, has clearly abandoned you to your fate." His words carried the casual cruelty of a man who had long ago sold his soul for advancement and gold. Pope Clement V sat in his papal apartments in Avignon, his pale hands trembling as he held the latest dispatch from Paris. At 58, the pontiff bore the weight of his position heavily, his thin frame bent by the burden of trying to serve both God and the political realities that kept him alive and in power. His watery blue eyes reflected the torment of a man caught between his conscience and his survival. Cardinal Francesco Caetani, nephew of the late Pope Boniface VIII, stood nearby with barely concealed anger. His aristocratic Roman features were set in lines of disgust as he read over the reports of torture and forced confessions. "Your Holiness," he said through gritted teeth, "these proceedings mock every principle of canon law and Christian justice." Clement rose from his chair, walking to the window that overlooked the Rhone River. Avignon was beautiful, but it was not Rome. His papacy existed here only through Philip's protection and at Philip's pleasure. "Cardinal Caetani, you forget the circumstances that brought me to this chair. Your uncle's defiance of the French crown led to his capture and humiliation. I will not see the papacy destroyed by pride." The cardinal's voice rose with passion. "But at what cost? We legitimize torture. We sanction the destruction of a religious order based on fabricated evidence. We allow earthly politics to corrupt ecclesiastical authority. How does this serve Christ's mission?" Clement turned back to face his subordinate, his expression one of profound weariness. "Sometimes, Francesco, we must choose between martyrdom and effectiveness. Dead popes serve no one, and a papacy in ruins cannot guide the faithful. Philip has made his position clear. I support his actions against the Templars, or I join them in disgrace." The weight of compromise settled over the room like incense, thick and suffocating. In the halls of Westminster Palace, King Edward II of England received the disturbing news from France with a mixture of shock and political calculation. At 23, Edward possessed his father's height, but lacked the hammer of the Scots' legendary strength of will. His handsome features bore an expression of genuine dismay as he read Philip's demands that all Templars within English domains be arrested immediately. "This is madness," Edward declared to his council, his voice carrying the uncertainty that would mark his troubled reign. "The Templars have served the crown faithfully. They manage our finances, guard our castles, provide counsel in matters of war. Philip asks me to destroy men who have never shown anything but loyalty." Sir Hugh Despencer the Elder, Edward's most trusted advisor, leaned forward with the calculating expression of a man who saw opportunity in crisis. "My lord, we must consider our position carefully. If we refuse Philip's demands, we risk alliance with France. If we comply, we risk internal rebellion from nobles who support the order." Master William de la More, preceptor of the English Templars, had been summoned to court and stood now in full ceremonial regalia. White mantle bearing the red cross, sword at his side, every inch the accomplished knight. His weathered face showed no fear, only the dignified resolve of a man prepared to face whatever fate awaited. At 55, he had devoted his life to the order's service and would not dishonor it now with cowardice. "Your Majesty," de la More spoke with quiet authority, "we have served England faithfully for generations. Our innocence of these charges is absolute. We ask only for fair hearing under English law, not the corrupted justice that Philip dispenses in France." Edward's dilemma crystallized before him. Political expediency warred with personal honor, alliance with justice, survival with righteousness. Brother Gerard de Villiers, commander of the Templar Preceptory at Cressing in Essex, knelt in the chapel of his fortress as reports arrived of arrests spreading across Europe. At 48, he had dedicated half his life to the order, transforming from a young knight seeking adventure into a seasoned administrator who managed vast agricultural holdings that fed thousands and funded the order's activities. His lieutenant, Brother Thomas de Thorn, burst into the chapel with urgent news. "Commander, royal messengers approach with a force of armed men. They bear writs of arrest signed by the king himself." Gerard completed his prayer before rising, his movements deliberate and unhurried despite the crisis. "Then we shall meet them with dignity, as befits Knights of Christ. Gather the brothers in the courtyard. We will not skulk like criminals or resist like rebels." Outside, the autumn fields of Essex stretched golden beneath grey skies, a peaceful landscape that seemed to mock the violence of human ambition. The Templar preceptory at Cressing had been a model of medieval efficiency. Its great barns stored grain that fed the poor. Its workshops produced goods for trade. Its school educated young nobles in letters and warfare. As the royal force approached, Brother Thomas struggled with conflicting emotions. "Commander, should we not send word to our treasures? Our documents? If these charges spread to England?" Gerard's expression remained serene. "Thomas, we have nothing to hide because we have done nothing wrong. Our records are open, our practices known to God and man alike. Let them come." Back in the dungeons beneath the Temple fortress in Paris, the psychological warfare intensified as Master Guillaume de Plaisillon introduced new instruments of persuasion. Brother Pierre de Bologna, the Italian knight, found himself face to face with a contraption of ropes and pulleys designed to slowly dislocate his shoulders and arms. The torturer's assistants, men whose souls had been numbed by years of inflicting suffering, prepared their grisly work with mechanical efficiency. The strappado has loosened many tongues, Plaisians observed with clinical detachment. Your shoulders will separate from their joints slowly, allowing you time to reconsider your stubborn denials. Tell us about the idol Baphomet, about the denial of Christ, about the obscene practices of your initiation ceremonies. Pierre's dark eyes met his tormentor's gaze without flinching. "I am 52 years old, Master Plaisians. I have endured Mamluk arrows, siege warfare, dysentery, and the loss of the Holy Land itself. Do you truly believe physical pain will make me bear false witness against the order that has been my life?" The ropes tightened, and Pierre's face contorted with agony as his shoulders began to bear weight they were never meant to carry. Still, his voice remained steady. "I have participated in hundreds of ceremonies, initiation rituals, chapter meetings. Never once have I witnessed anything contrary to Christian faith." In his cell above, Grand Master Jacques de Molay listened to another brother's suffering and felt his own resolve being tested in ways no battlefield ever had. The enemy he faced now was not honorable combat, but the grinding machinery of political persecution that turned human souls into instruments of their own destruction. Brother Geoffroy's voice rose in prayer, trying to drown out the sounds from below. "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." King Philip IV stood in his private counting chamber, surrounded by ledgers and treasury reports that painted a dire picture of royal finances. The war in Flanders had drained his coffers, and the expelled Jews had taken much of their portable wealth with them when he had seized their properties years earlier. His beautiful features were marred by lines of stress as he contemplated the kingdom's precarious financial state. "The Templar arrests have yielded less than anticipated," reported Master Jean de Marigny, the royal chamberlain, whose thin face bore the perpetual worry of a man responsible for an empty treasury. "Their main treasures seem to have been moved before our operation began." Philip's jaw tightened with frustrated rage. "Moved where? Gold and silver do not simply vanish like morning mist. Someone warned them. Someone with access to our plans." His pale blue eyes swept the chamber, studying each advisor with renewed suspicion. Brother Esquin de Floyrand shifted uncomfortably, knowing that his position as royal informant made him particularly vulnerable to accusations of double-dealing. "Your Majesty, the Order maintained extensive networks throughout Europe. Their wealth may have been distributed to England, Germany, or even holdings in the East that we know nothing about. The king's frustration boiled over. Then we squeeze harder. Every Templar in France will confess to whatever crimes we require. Their guilt or innocence matters nothing. What matters is legal justification for seizing all their remaining properties and establishing precedent for similar actions across Europe. Master Guillaume de Nogaret entered the chamber, carrying fresh reports from the interrogations. His angular face bore an expression of grim satisfaction as he announced, "Sire, we have secured confessions from 43 Templars. The younger knights break most readily. Fear of pain often proves as effective as pain itself." Philip's smile returned, cold and calculating as winter steel. In the Aragonese court of King James II, news of the Templar arrests created a different kind of political calculation. The Aragonese king, wise and experienced at 42, understood that Philip's actions represented a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the delicate balance of European power. His weathered features, marked by years of warfare and diplomacy, showed deep concern as he consulted with his advisors. Philip moves against the Templars, not from righteousness, but from desperation, James observed to his council. A king who arrests an entire religious order for gold today may tomorrow find excuses to seize the properties of nobles, merchants, or even allied kingdoms. Master Ramon de Saguardia, commander of the Aragonese Templars, stood before the king with quiet dignity. Unlike his French brothers, he remained free and armed, his hand resting naturally on his sword hilt. "Your Majesty, we place ourselves under your protection and submit to whatever investigation you deem necessary. Our innocence will withstand any honest scrutiny." King James studied the Templar commander with measuring eyes. The order controlled significant holdings throughout Aragon, including several important castles that guarded the frontier with Muslim Granada. Their military expertise and financial resources had proven invaluable in the ongoing Reconquista. "Master Ramon, I'm inclined to resist Philip's demands for immediate arrests. However, I cannot ignore accusations backed by papal authority, however reluctantly given." James paused, weighing political necessity against personal honor. "I propose a compromise. House arrest for your senior officers while we conduct our own investigation. This protects you from Philip's torturers while demonstrating our compliance with church authority." Ramon bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty's wisdom and justice honor the memory of your father. We accept your judgment and trust in Aragonese fairness." The king nodded grimly, knowing that this decision would likely earn him Philip's enmity, but preserve his kingdom's integrity. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu pressed his young face against the cold stone of his cell wall, trying to find some small crack or crevice that might allow him to see beyond his prison. The screams from the torture chambers had become a constant background to their captivity, and the young knight struggled to maintain the faith that had brought him to the order. "Uncle Guillaume would have fought," he whispered to himself, thinking of the legendary Grand Master who had died defending Acre. He would have drawn his sword and made them pay in blood for their treachery. From the neighbouring cell, Brother Pierre de Bologna's voice carried the wisdom of experience and suffering. "Young Guillaume, your uncle fought enemies who came with honest steel in honest battle. This enemy hides behind legal documents and papal authority. Our weapons in this fight must be truth and endurance, not sword and shield." The young knight's voice cracked with emotion. "But Brother Pierre, how can we endure when they break our brothers one by one? When they turn our own ceremonies into evidence of heresy? When even the Pope seems to have abandoned us?" Pierre's response came slowly, weighted with the pain of his recent torture. "Faith, my boy, is not tested when God seems close and victory certain. It is tested precisely in moments like these, when all earthly support fails, and only the eternal remains. Our order was founded to serve God, not kings or popes or political convenience." Through the walls, they could hear Brother Geoffroy de Charnay leading evening prayers, his voice strong despite their circumstances. The familiar Latin words provided an anchor of normalcy in their world, turned upside down. A reminder that some things transcended the machinations of earthly power. Pater noster qui es in caelis. The prayer rose like incense through the stone corridors, carrying hope where hope seemed impossible. Master William de la Moor, preceptor of England, found himself standing in the Tower of London's White Tower, though his treatment differed markedly from his French brother's ordeal. King Edward II had yielded to French pressure, but maintained some semblance of English legal tradition. The English Templars were imprisoned but not tortured, questioned but not broken on wheels and racks. Sir Hugh Despenser the Younger, Edward's controversial favourite, visited the imprisoned Templar leader with what appeared to be genuine regret. At 28, Hugh possessed a sharp intelligence that had earned him both influence and enemies among the English nobility. His handsome features showed conflicted emotions as he faced the man who had once been his father's close ally. "Master William," Hugh began carefully, "the king has asked me to offer you terms. Confess to lesser charges of financial irregularities and administrative corruption, and you may retain some properties while the order is dissolved quietly. Refuse, and we must comply with Philip's demands for full prosecution." William de la Moor stood with dignity despite his circumstances. His grey hair was neatly arranged, his bearing still commanding even in captivity. "Sir Hugh, I have served 3 English kings faithfully. I have managed the order's English holdings honestly and openly. I will not bear false witness to save my skin or even to save our properties." Hugh's voice dropped to a whisper. "William, you must understand the political realities. Philip has made this a test of Edward's loyalty to France. If we refuse to prosecute the Templars, Philip may support certain dissatisfied English nobles who question Edward's right to rule. The implied threat hung between them like a sword. English politics had grown treacherous since Edward's accession, with his father's military failures in Scotland and his own controversial personal relationships creating dangerous instabilities. The Templar crisis was becoming another weapon in the arsenal of those who sought to weaken royal authority. Pope Clement V knelt in his private chapel in Avignon, seeking divine guidance for decisions that seemed to offer only damnation, regardless of choice. The morning light, filtering through stained glass, cast coloured patterns across the marble floor, but the beauty could not penetrate the darkness in his soul. His thin hands shook as he clutched his rosary, each bead a prayer for wisdom in an impossible situation. Cardinal Jacques Duez, later to become Pope John XXII, approached with the latest reports from across Europe. His sharp, intelligent features reflected the pragmatic political mind that had made him Clement's most trusted advisor. "Your Holiness, the situation grows more complex daily. King Edward resists full prosecution in England. King James delays in Aragon, and the German princes question papal authority in this matter." Clement rose slowly, his frail frame betraying the weight of his position. "Jacques, I find myself caught between Scylla and Charybdis. Support Philip's actions, and I legitimize torture and false accusations. Oppose him, and the papacy faces destruction." The cardinal's voice carried careful calculation. "Perhaps, Your Holiness, we might craft a response that appears to support Philip while actually limiting his authority. Grant him permission to investigate the Templars, but insist that final judgment rests with church tribunals following canonical procedures." Clement's watery blue eyes showed a flicker of hope. A papal bull that seems to grant Philip what he wants while actually constraining his actions. "But Jacques, he has already begun torturing Templars. How can we legitimize what has already been done while preventing future excesses?" The cardinal smiled with the satisfaction of a man solving a complex puzzle. "We express regret for the haste of the arrests while acknowledging the seriousness of the charges. We take control of the proceedings while appearing to cooperate with royal authority. Outside, the bells of Avignon began their call to morning prayer, their bronze voices carrying across a city that had become the reluctant capital of a compromised Christendom. The great hall of the Temple fortress in Paris had been transformed from a place of prayer and ceremony into a courtroom designed to produce predetermined verdicts. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon presided over proceedings that bore the trappings of justice while delivering the substance of persecution. Scribes sat ready to record whatever confessions could be extracted through fear, pain, or false promises. Brother Antoine de Sivry, one of the younger knights who had broken under torture, stood before the tribunal with visible trembling. His left arm hung useless from shoulder damage inflicted by the strappado, and his face bore the hollow look of a man whose spirit had been shattered along with his body. The confession he was forced to recite spoke of heretical practices that existed only in the fevered imagination of his interrogators. "I confess," Antoine's voice barely rose above a whisper, "to denying Christ during my initiation, to spitting upon the cross, to worshipping an idol called Baphomet." Each word seemed to tear pieces from his soul, but the alternative was a return to the torture chamber and agonies that his broken body could not endure. Behind the prosecution table, Brother Escon de Floyrand took careful notes, his face a mask that concealed the self-loathing eating at his conscience. His betrayal had purchased him safety and gold, but every forced confession he witnessed reminded him of his own damnation. The Templar rules he had once sworn to uphold spoke clearly about the fate of those who betrayed their brothers. Master Plaisians smiled with satisfaction as each fabricated detail was carefully recorded. These confessions would provide legal justification for seizing all Templar properties and could be used to pressure other European monarchs to follow Philip's example. Truth was irrelevant. Only the appearance of legal process mattered. In the gallery, royal observers from several kingdoms watched the proceedings with varying degrees of disgust and admiration for Philip's ruthless efficiency. Queen Joan of Navarre received disturbing reports from her network of court ladies about the conditions in the temple dungeons. Lady Marguerite de Poitiers, whose husband served as a royal guard, spoke in hushed tones about scenes that had shaken even seasoned soldiers accustomed to violence. "Your Majesty," Marguerite whispered as they walked in the Queen's private garden, "the guards speak of men driven mad by pain, of knights who once commanded armies now reduced to gibbering shadows. Some beg for death as release from their suffering." Joan's beautiful features hardened with anger and disgust. She had married Philip knowing his capacity for ruthlessness, but the systematic torture of religious knights crossed lines that even political necessity could not justify. "And what does my lord husband say when confronted with these reports?" Lady Marguerite's voice dropped even lower. "He claims that extraordinary crimes require extraordinary measures. Master de Nogaret supports him, arguing that the Templars' wealth and influence pose threats that justify harsh methods." The Queen paused beside a fountain, where water played musically over carved stone, its peaceful sound a stark contrast to the horrors being discussed. "Marguerite, there are whispers that Pope Clement grows uncomfortable with the proceedings. Perhaps pressure from the Church might moderate my husband's methods." Lady Catherine de Courtenay, another of Joan's confidants, joined their conversation with urgent news. "Your Majesty, I have just received word from my brother in Avignon. The Pope is preparing a bull that may challenge the king's authority over the Templars." Joan's eyes brightened with the first hope she had felt in weeks. If ecclesiastical authority could be marshalled against Philip's excesses, perhaps the systematic torture might end. But she also understood her husband well enough to know that he would not yield easily to papal pressure, especially when his kingdom's financial survival hung in the balance. Brother Geoffroy de Charny, despite his own imprisonment and the constant sounds of torture echoing through the fortress, had become the unofficial spiritual leader of the captive Templars. His strong voice carried through the stone corridors each morning and evening, leading prayers that provided the only comfort available to his suffering brothers. Domine, non secundum peccata nostra facias nobis. His Latin words rose above the groans and whispers of despair. Lord, do not deal with us according to our sins. The irony was not lost on him. They were being punished not for their actual sins, which were human and forgivable, but for crimes they had never committed. In his cell, Brother Henri de Chalon listened to Geoffroy's prayers with desperate attention. The young knight's faith had been shaken to its foundations by witnessing the torture of older brothers he had revered as saints. Brother Geoffroy, he called out during a pause in the prayers, how can God permit such injustice? How can he allow righteous men to suffer while wicked men prosper? Geoffroy's response came with the authority of a man who had faced death in battle and found peace in acceptance. Young Henri, Job asked the same questions when afflicted by undeserved suffering. God's answer was not explanation, but presence. We suffer, but we do not suffer alone. Christ himself was falsely accused, tortured, and executed by corrupt authorities. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor silenced their conversation. The guards were making their evening rounds, checking for any signs of communication between prisoners or attempts at escape. Brother Geoffroy resumed his prayers, but now they carried a different tone. Not just comfort for the present, but preparation for whatever trials tomorrow might bring. Through the small barred window of his cell, he could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, distant points of light that seemed to promise that this darkness too would eventually pass. King Philip IV met with his inner council in the deepest chamber of the royal palace, where stone walls thick enough to withstand siege engines ensured that no word of their deliberations could escape. Master Guillaume de Nogaret spread maps across the oak table, marking Templar holdings throughout Europe, with red ink that looked ominously like blood in the torchlight. The confessions we have extracted provide legal foundation for seizing all French properties, Nogaret reported with satisfaction. However, the other kingdoms resist our demands. Edward delays in England. James offers only token compliance in Aragon, and the German princes openly defy papal authority. Philip's beautiful features were marred by lines of frustration and calculation. Then we must provide them with incentives to cooperate. What is the status of our financial obligations to English merchants? Do we owe significant sums to Aragonese traders? Master Jean de Marigny consulted his ledgers with the nervous energy of a man whose life depended on accurate accounting. Sire, we owe substantial amounts to both kingdoms. If we default on those debts while simultaneously demanding Templar prosecutions, they will understand that compliance brings continued trade relations, while resistance brings financial consequences. Philip finished with cold logic. Commerce often proves more persuasive than papal bulls or royal demands. Brother Esquin de Florent shifted uncomfortably as the discussion revealed the purely mercenary nature of the entire enterprise. His betrayal of the order had been motivated by personal grievances and promises of reward. But witnessing the systematic planning of continental persecution made him understand the true scope of what he had helped unleash. The king's pale blue eyes fixed on each man present. Gentlemen, we stand at a crucial moment. Success here establishes precedent for royal authority over all religious orders. Failure could embolden every power that challenges our sovereignty. Outside, the bells of Paris rang midnight, marking another day in the systematic destruction of the Knights Templar. In the Templar commandery at Cressing in Essex, Brother Gerard de Villiers maintained his composure, even as royal officials inventoried everything from golden chalices to farm implements. The English approach differed markedly from French methods, thorough but not brutal, legalistic but not sadistic. Sir Hugh Despenser the Elder oversaw the proceedings personally, his weathered face showing distaste for the entire business. Commander Gerard, Sir Hugh addressed the Templar leader with grudging respect. King Edward has instructed me to treat this as an investigation rather than a persecution. Your brothers remain in comfortable confinement while we examine your records and interview members about your practices. Gerard bowed courteously. Sir Hugh, we welcome honest scrutiny of our affairs. Our books are open, our ceremonies witnessed by many outside the order, our lives dedicated to service. We fear no investigation conducted in good faith. Brother Thomas de Thorne, Gerard's lieutenant, watched nervously as clerks examined the preceptory's financial records. Unlike the French Templars, the English had received warning and had time to prepare, though their preparations involved organizing their documentation rather than hiding wealth. Their innocence was their best defense. Sir Hugh, Thomas ventured carefully, we have heard disturbing reports from France about the methods employed there. Surely English justice operates by different principles. Sir Hugh's expression darkened. Master Thomas, I have served 3 kings and witnessed many expedient prosecutions. I assure you that while we must investigate these charges, we will not employ French methods. English law requires evidence beyond extorted confessions. The autumn afternoon light streaming through the commandery's windows seemed to promise that reason might yet prevail, at least in England. But all present understood that political pressures could override legal principles if Philip's influence proved strong enough to compel Edward's complete compliance. Pope Clement V's hand trembled as he signed the papal bull Pastoralis Praemonentiae, knowing that his words would determine the fate of thousands of men across Europe. The document represented a careful compromise that satisfied no one completely, but might prevent total disaster. Cardinal Jacques Duez stood beside him, ready to explain the complex legal language to papal nuncios, who would carry the bull to every Christian kingdom. The bull grants monarchs authority to arrest Templars within their realms, Duez explained to the assembled papal officials, but reserves final judgment to church tribunals. It appears to support the investigations while actually limiting royal authority. Bishop Guillaume de Bayonne, one of Clement's most trusted canonists, frowned as he studied the document. Your Holiness, this language may be too subtle for kings desperate for quick solutions. Philip will interpret this as complete papal approval for his methods. Clement's voice carried the weariness of a man forced to choose between evils. Bishop Guillaume, we face an impossible situation. Absolute support for Philip legitimizes torture and persecution. Absolute opposition invites the destruction of the papacy itself. This compromise preserves church authority while acknowledging political realities. Cardinal Francesco Caetani, still nursing anger over the proceedings, could not remain silent. Your Holiness, we ask church tribunals to judge men whose confessions were extracted through torture. How can canonical procedure function when the evidence itself is tainted by violence? The weight of the decision settled over the papal chamber like incense, thick and suffocating. Clement understood that history would judge his choice, but he also knew that dead popes could not protect the Church's future. Sometimes survival required compromise with evil, even when such compromise stained the soul. Outside, papal messengers prepared for journeys that would carry the bull to every corner of Christendom, where its carefully crafted ambiguities would be interpreted according to each ruler's political needs. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu, the young nephew of the legendary Grand Master, found his faith tested not by torture, but by the sight of his broken brothers. From his cell window, he could see other Templars in the exercise yard, men who had once commanded armies now shuffling like beaten animals, their spirits crushed by systematic brutality. Brother Antoine de Sivry, who had confessed under torture, avoided the eyes of other prisoners, his shame visible in every gesture. The false confession he had given haunted him more than his physical injuries. He had betrayed not just himself, but the order's reputation and the memory of every brother who had died for their ideals. "Antoine," Guillaume called out during their brief time in the yard, "you must not carry this burden alone. We understand what drove you to speak as you did." The older knight's voice cracked with emotion. "Guillaume, you do not understand. They made me say things, describe practices that never happened, and now those lies will be used to condemn innocent brothers across Europe. Brother Pierre de Boulogne, despite his own torture injuries, approached with the dignity that torture could injure but not destroy. Antoine, lies extracted through torture carry no weight before God. Human flesh has limitations, but human souls need not break even when bodies do." Young Guillaume watched this exchange with growing maturity. The boy who had entered the order seeking glory was becoming a man who understood that true courage sometimes meant enduring rather than fighting, bearing witness rather than striking blows. "Brothers," Guillaume said quietly, "whether we live or die, whether our order survives or perishes, we must ensure that future generations know the truth. Someone must remember what really happened here, who we really were, and why we really died." The autumn wind carried their words away, but their resolution remained, growing stronger in the face of seemingly hopeless circumstances. Master Guillaume de Nogaret reviewed the intelligence reports flowing in from across Europe with the satisfaction of a spider feeling vibrations in its web. His network of spies and informants provided detailed accounts of how other kingdoms were responding to papal pressure and French diplomatic threats. "The English continue to resist full prosecution," he reported to King Philip, his angular features sharp in the candlelight of the king's private study. "However, their resistance weakens as we pressure their merchant interests. Threatening to default on our debts to English traders has concentrated Edward's mind wonderfully." Philip leaned back in his chair, studying a letter bearing the papal seal. "Clement's bull grants us what we need while pretending to preserve church authority. His canonical tribunals will judge evidence we provide, evidence extracted through methods we deem necessary." A messenger arrived with urgent news from Aragon, his travel-stained clothes suggesting hard riding. "Your Majesty, King James has agreed to arrest the Templar leadership, but continues to resist torture and expedited trials. He insists on following traditional legal procedures." Philip's pale eyes glittered with calculation. James has always been too scrupulous for his own good. Perhaps he needs reminding that French support for Aragonese interests in Sicily and southern Italy depends on our continued friendship. Nogaret's smile revealed teeth stained by wine and ambition. "Sire, we have also received interesting intelligence about Templar treasure movements. Several witnesses report seeing packed wagons leaving French preceptories in the weeks before our arrests. The trail leads toward the English Channel and ship departures for England and Cyprus." The king's fist struck the oak table with sudden fury. "They knew!" Someone warned them, gave them time to move their wealth beyond our reach. "Find me the traitor, Guillaume. Find him and make him pay for costing us a king's ransom in gold." Brother Raoul de Gizy, former keeper of the Templar treasury, lay in his cell with feet grotesquely swollen from repeated applications of hot irons. The torturer's art had advanced beyond simple pain to systematic destruction of the human body, leaving him unable to walk but still alive to bear witness to his suffering. His voice, when he could summon it, spoke truths that his tormentors refused to hear. "The treasure," he whispered to Brother Geoffroy through the stone wall separating their cells, "was moved by Grand Master's order 3 weeks before the arrests. Ships bound for Cyprus and England carried our most valuable holdings beyond Philip's reach." Geoffroy's voice carried hope despite their circumstances. "Then our brothers in other lands may yet continue the order's mission. Our suffering here serves a purpose if it allows the work to continue elsewhere." Above them, Master Guillaume de Plaisillon prepared for another day of extracting confessions that would justify the persecution. His success rate had improved as he learned which Templars could be broken quickly and which required more. Persuasive methods. The younger knights proved most vulnerable to threats and pain, while the older crusading veterans possessed disturbing reserves of endurance. Today, we question the Grand Master directly, Plaisillons announced to his staff of torturers and scribes. Jacques de Molay's confession would legitimize all our proceedings and provide unquestionable authority for seizing the order's remaining properties. Brother Esquin de Floyrand, present to provide expert testimony about Templar practices, felt his stomach clench with dread. He had betrayed the order for personal advancement, but witnessing the systematic torture of the Grand Master might prove more than his corrupted conscience could bear. The morning sun cast long shadows through the fortress windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like souls seeking escape from the earthly hell Philip had created beneath the stones of Paris. Grand Master Jacques de Molay was dragged from his cell into the interrogation chamber, his dignity intact despite the chains that bound his wrists and ankles. At 63, his body showed the accumulated damage of decades of warfare and months of imprisonment. But his grey eyes burned with undiminished determination. The chamber itself had been arranged like a theatre of cruelty, with implements of torture displayed to maximize psychological impact. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon circled the Grand Master like a predator studying prey, his sharp features twisted into an expression of false sympathy. Jacques, you see how your brothers have suffered for your stubbornness. Young Guillaume de Beaujeu screams your name in his sleep. Brother Antoine bears scars that will mark him forever. End their suffering, confess to the charges, and spare them further agony. The Grand Master's voice remained steady despite the circumstances. Master Plaisillons, I have led this order for 17 years. I have witnessed the fall of our last strongholds in Outremer, managed our retreat from the Holy Land, and tried to prepare for a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. In all those years, I have never witnessed, participated in, or sanctioned any practice contrary to Christian faith. Plaisillons gestured to the torturer, Master Jean de Jamville, who began heating irons in the brazier with practiced efficiency. Your defiance condemns innocent men to continued suffering. Is your pride worth their pain? Jacques met his tormentor's gaze without flinching. My pride matters nothing, but I will not bear false witness against an order that has served God faithfully for 2 centuries. I will not destroy the reputation of thousands of brothers who died defending Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Truth matters more than my comfort or even my life. The sound of heating metal filled the chamber as the true test of faith and endurance began. King Edward II of England sat in council at Westminster, surrounded by nobles whose conflicting loyalties reflected the impossible position Philip's demands had created. The young king's handsome features showed the strain of trying to balance friendship with France against loyalty to subjects who had served his crown faithfully for generations. Master William de la Moore had been brought from the Tower to testify before the Royal Council, his dignified bearing unchanged, despite weeks of imprisonment. Sir Hugh Despencer the Younger stood at Edward's right hand, his influence over the king evident in their positioning and frequent exchanged glances. Master William, Edward began, his voice carrying genuine reluctance. We have received detailed reports from France about confessions extracted from your French brothers. How do you respond to accusations that your order practices heretical rituals and denies Christ? William's grey eyes met the king's without wavering. Your Majesty, I have devoted my life to serving Christ through this order. I have witnessed hundreds of ceremonies, initiated dozens of brothers, and never once seen anything contrary to Christian faith. The confessions from France were extracted through torture that would make any man say anything to end his suffering. Sir William Inge, Chief Justice of England, leaned forward with legal precision. Master William, without torture, how do you explain the consistency of these confessions? Multiple witnesses describing identical heretical practices suggests more than mere coincidence. The Templar preceptor's response carried the authority of truth. My lord, when tortured men are asked specific questions about specific practices, they will confirm whatever their torturers wish to hear. Consistency in forced testimony proves only the consistency of the questions asked. Edward's dilemma crystallized before him. Accept the French accusations, and he became complicit in what appeared to be judicial murder. Reject them, and he risked war with Philip at a time when Scotland remained unconquered and royal authority faced constant challenge. Brother Pierre de Bologna endured his second session with the strappado, his shoulders now permanently damaged from the rope torture that slowly dislocated joints while keeping victims conscious to experience maximum agony. His dark eyes, though clouded with pain, still held the unbreakable faith that had sustained him through the fall of Acre and decades of faithful service. Tell us about the obscene kiss, Master Jean de Jamville demanded, as he adjusted the ropes to increase pressure on Pierre's damaged shoulders. Describe how new initiates were forced to kiss the buttocks of senior knights during secret ceremonies. Pierre's voice emerged as a hoarse whisper, but his words carried absolute conviction. There is no obscene kiss. Our ceremonies follow Christian tradition. New brothers kiss the Bible and swear holy vows. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon circled the suspended man like a vulture studying carrion. Brother Pierre, your stubbornness serves no purpose. We have confessions from younger knights describing these exact practices. Your denial only prolongs your suffering. Through gritted teeth, Pierre managed a response that shook even his torturers. Young men, broken by pain, will confess to anything, but God knows the truth. Our order served Christ faithfully. Your accusations are lies born of greed. In the cells above, other Templars listened to their brothers' suffering with prayers and tears. Brother Geoffroy de Charnay led them in reciting the Psalms, his strong voice carrying through stone walls. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. The words provided what comfort they could to men facing systematic torture, designed not just to extract confessions, but to break the human spirit itself. Philip's persecution had become a war against faith itself, testing whether human souls could endure what human bodies could not. Queen Joan of Navarre made a dangerous decision that could cost her marriage and perhaps her life. Using her personal seal and drawing on loyalties that predated her marriage to Philip, she sent secret messages to courts across Europe, warning them about the true nature of the Templar persecution. Her network of female relatives and childhood friends provided channels of communication that Philip's spies had never thought to monitor. Lady Marguerite de Poitiers served as her primary messenger, carrying letters hidden in the false bottom of jewelry boxes and sewn into the lining of travelling cloaks. The correspondence reached Queen Isabella of Aragon, Countess Mahaut of Artois, and even influential abbesses who could pressure church authorities. Your Majesty, Marguerite whispered as they walked in the garden under cover of discussing rose cultivation. The response has been encouraging. Several courts express private horror at the methods employed, though they dare not oppose Philip openly. Joan paused beside the fountain where flowing water would mask their conversation from any hidden listeners. The truth must reach those with power to act. If enough voices speak against these methods, even Philip may be forced to moderate his approach. Lady Catherine de Courtenay joined them with news that made Joan's heart race with hope and fear. Your Majesty, I have received word that Pope Clement grows increasingly uncomfortable with the proceedings. Cardinal Caetani argues strongly for canonical investigation rather than royal persecution. The Queen understood the terrible risk she was taking. If Philip discovered her interference in his carefully planned operation, her royal blood might not protect her from his rage. Queens had been set aside for lesser acts of defiance, and Philip's need for Templar wealth exceeded his affection for any individual, even his wife. But watching the systematic torture of religious knights had awakened something in Joan that royal caution could not silence. Brother Henri de Chalon, the youngest of the imprisoned Templars, experienced a crisis of faith that cut deeper than any physical torture. Watching his heroes broken and brutalized had shattered his idealistic understanding of divine justice and earthly power. The boy who had joined the order seeking glory now questioned whether God himself had abandoned them to their fate. "Brother Geoffroy," he called through the stone wall during their evening prayer time. "If we are innocent, why does God permit such suffering? If we serve Christ faithfully, why are we abandoned to torturers and false accusers?" Geoffroy's response came slowly, weighted with the wisdom of suffering. Henri, Christ himself, was falsely accused, tortured and executed by corrupt authorities. The apostles were martyred by earthly powers that could not understand divine truth. Our suffering places us in noble company. But Henri's youthful idealism struggled against harsh reality. The Grand Master speaks of truth mattering more than life, but what good is truth if it dies with us? What purpose does our suffering serve if Philip succeeds in destroying our reputation and stealing our wealth? From another cell, Brother Pierre de Bologna's voice joined their conversation, despite his torture injuries. "Young brother, truth has a power beyond earthly destruction. Someone will remember, someone will investigate, someone will write the real history of what happened here." Henri pressed his face against the cold stone of his cell wall, seeking some connection to the world beyond their prison. But who will believe us against the word of kings and the silence of popes? Who will speak for dead men when living ones find profit in our destruction? The answer came from an unexpected source, Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu, who had found his own path from despair to determination. "We will speak for ourselves, Henri. Through our endurance, our dignity, our refusal to confess to lies. Every day we survive with honor is a day truth outlasts persecution." Master Guillaume de Nogaret received intelligence that filled him with both fury and grudging admiration for Templar cunning. His network of spies had finally traced the movement of the Order's treasure, revealing an operation of breathtaking scope and organization that had anticipated their persecution by months. The ships departed Marseille, La Rochelle, and Boulogne in the weeks before our arrests, he reported to King Philip, his angular features sharp with frustration. "Our informants in the ports confirmed substantial gold and silver shipments to England, Cyprus, and even Scotland. The Templars moved their wealth beyond our reach while maintaining the pretense of normal operations." Philip's beautiful face transformed with rage, his pale blue eyes blazing with the fury of a predator discovering that his prey had escaped the trap. "Someone warned them. Someone in this very room, or someone close enough to learn our plans, betrayed our operation for Templar gold." The king's gaze swept his assembled advisors with paranoid intensity. Master Jean de Marigny shifted nervously, understanding that royal suspicion could destroy innocent men as easily as guilty ones. Brother Esquin de Floiron pressed himself against the wall, knowing that his position as a former Templar made him particularly vulnerable to accusations of double treachery. "Sire," Nogaret continued carefully, "our investigation suggests the warning came not from within our immediate circle, but from papal sources. The Grand Master received visitors from Avignon in the weeks before our action. Pope Clement may have provided indirect warning while maintaining plausible deniability. Philip's fist struck the oak table with enough force to scatter the documents spread across its surface. Then Clement plays a double game, supporting our actions publicly while undermining them privately. The pontiff will learn that French protection comes with French obedience. The implications hung in the air like storm clouds. If Philip moved against papal authority directly, he risked excommunication and the collapse of his entire justification for the Templar persecution. In the Templar preceptory of Acre, now relocated to Cyprus after the fall of the Holy Land, Brother Thibaut Gaudin received the devastating news from France with prayers of gratitude mixed with tears of grief. As one of the few surviving veterans of the last crusade, he understood better than most what the Order's destruction would mean for any future attempt to reclaim Jerusalem. The treasure ships arrived safely, he reported to the assembled brothers who had gathered in their new temple on the island. Our French brothers' sacrifice bought us time to preserve the Order's resources and mission. Brother Amalric de Villiers, treasurer of the Cyprus Preceptory, spread the latest letters from England and Aragon across the wooden table. The persecution spreads, but resistance grows. King Edward hesitates, King James delays, and several German princes openly defy papal authority. The Cypriot Templars represented the Order's last hope for continuation. They possessed substantial treasure moved from France, maintained their own fleet of ships, and operated beyond the reach of both Philip's agents and papal pressure. Their preceptory had become an ark, preserving 2 centuries of accumulated knowledge, wealth, and purpose. "What word from the Grand Master?" asked Brother Raymond de Lescure, whose grey hair and scarred hands testified to decades of service in the East. Thibaut's voice broke slightly as he read from the latest smuggled message. "Jacques remains defiant despite torture. He sends word that we must continue the mission regardless of what befalls the Order in Europe. The Holy Land calls, and we must answer even if we answer alone." Through the windows of their new temple, the Mediterranean stretched toward the horizon, where Jerusalem lay beyond reach, but not beyond hope. The Templars had lost much, but they had not lost everything. Their story would continue, even if it continued in exile. Pope Clement V found himself trapped between competing pressures that threatened to tear both his soul and his papacy apart. Cardinal Francesco Caetani's daily reports about torture in Paris had become unbearable to read, while King Philip's messengers arrived with increasing frequency, demanding absolute papal support for proceedings that grew more brutal by the day. "Your Holiness," Cardinal Caetani spoke with barely controlled anger, "we have received eyewitness accounts of Templars being burned with hot irons, suspended by dislocated shoulders, and threatened with death if they maintain their innocence. How can the Church legitimize such methods?" Clement paced his chambers like a caged animal. His thin frame bowed under burdens that seemed to grow heavier each day. "Francesco, Philip has made his position clear. Complete support for his actions, or the papacy faces destruction. He controls our security, our finances, our very presence in Avignon." Bishop Guillaume de Bayonne entered with news that made the pontiff's complexion turn ashen. "Your Holiness, Philip's latest message demands that you issue a second bull explicitly authorizing torture in Templar investigations. He claims that canonical inquiry requires the same methods used in civil prosecution. The request represented a line that even Clement's compromised conscience could not cross. Authorizing torture would make the Church directly complicit in atrocities that violated every principle of Christian justice. Yet refusing might provoke Philip to actions that could destroy the papacy entirely. "Summon Cardinal Duez," Clement commanded, his voice showing new resolve. "We must find language that appears to grant Philip's request while actually limiting his authority. Perhaps we can authorize necessary investigation without explicitly sanctioning specific methods." Through the windows of his chambers, the bells of Avignon called the faithful to evening prayers, their bronze voices carrying across a city that had become both sanctuary and prison for the corrupted heart of Christendom. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu discovered that suffering had transformed him from a naive young knight seeking glory into a man of unexpected strength and wisdom. As he listened to the continued torture of his brothers through the stone walls of the temple fortress, he began to understand that their persecution had become something larger than Philip's greed. It had become a test of whether truth could survive systematic assault by earthly power. "Brother Henri," he called through the wall to his younger companion, "I have been thinking about Uncle Guillaume's defense of Acre. He knew the city would fall, knew that his death was certain, but he fought anyway. Why?" Henri's voice carried new maturity, born of witnessing unimaginable cruelty. Perhaps because some things matter more than victory or survival. Perhaps because bearing witness to truth is its own form of victory. From his cell, Brother Geoffroy de Charny joined their conversation with the authority of a man who had found peace in the midst of hell. "Your uncle fought for the idea that Christians could hold sacred ground. We fight for the idea that truth can survive persecution. Both fights serve God, regardless of their earthly outcomes." The sound of approaching footsteps silenced their discussion, but Guillaume felt something new stirring in his heart. Not the desperate hope for rescue or vindication, but the calm certainty that their suffering served a purpose beyond their understanding. They were writing a story with their blood and endurance, a story that would outlast Philip's kingdom and the papacy's compromises. Through his small window, Guillaume could see the first light of dawn touching the spires of Notre Dame. Somewhere in that growing light, people were beginning to ask questions about the arrests, about the methods, about the true nature of the charges against the Templars. Truth had a power that tyranny could wound but never kill. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon prepared for what he knew would be the most crucial interrogation of the entire proceeding, extracting a confession from Grand Master Jacques de Molay that would legitimize all previous tortures and provide unquestionable legal foundation for destroying the order. The chamber had been prepared with special care, including instruments of torture arranged to maximize psychological impact before physical pain began. "Grand Master," Plaisillons began, with false courtesy, "surely you understand that your continued defiance serves no purpose. Your brothers suffer while you maintain stubborn pride. A simple confession ends their agony and grants you the mercy of quick death rather than prolonged torment." Jacques de Molay, despite months of imprisonment and the physical deterioration that showed in his gaunt frame and grey pallor, retained the dignity that had made him a leader of men. His grey eyes met his tormentor's gaze without flinching. "Master Plaisillons, I have spent 17 years as Grand Master trying to preserve an order dedicated to serving God and protecting Christian pilgrims. I will not destroy that legacy with false words to satisfy a king's greed." The prosecutor gestured to Master Jean de Janville, who began heating irons with the methodical precision of a craftsman preparing his tools. "Your suffering will be legendary, Jacques. We have developed techniques that keep men conscious through days of agony. Your screams will echo through these walls until you find your voice for confession." The Grand Master's response carried the authority of a man who had faced death many times and no longer feared it. "My screams may echo through these walls, but my soul will echo through eternity. I served God faithfully for 40 years, and I will not end that service with lies born of political ambition." As the irons began to glow red hot, Jacques closed his eyes and began to pray, preparing his spirit for the ultimate test of faith and endurance. Queen Joan of Navarre's secret correspondence had reached sympathetic ears across Europe, creating the first organized resistance to Philip's methods. In England, Queen Isabella, not yet married to Edward II but already influential at court, used her position to pressure English nobles toward more humane treatment of imprisoned Templars. Lady Marguerite de Poitiers returned from her latest mission with encouraging news disguised as gossip about fashions and court entertainments. Your Majesty, the English court grows increasingly uncomfortable with French demands. Several barons speak openly about the difference between English justice and French persecution. Joan felt a flicker of hope amid the darkness that had consumed her court since the arrests began. What word from Aragon? King James has always been more principled than politically expedient. Lady Catherine de Courtenay joined their garden conversation, with a letter hidden in her prayer book. Your Majesty, Queen Violent of Aragon sends private word that James delays prosecution while ensuring proper canonical procedure. His delays grow longer as pressure for haste increases. The Queen understood the coded language. James was buying time for Templar treasure to reach safety, while publicly appearing to comply with papal demands. Each day of delay allowed more evidence of Philip's methods to spread, making other kingdoms less willing to employ similar tactics. The network grows, Joan observed with satisfaction. Women may not command armies or issue bulls, but we carry information that armies cannot stop and bulls cannot silence. From across the garden, the sound of approaching footsteps warned that their private conversation must end. As they seamlessly shifted to discussing rose varieties and silk imports, Joan felt the dangerous satisfaction of rebellion against her husband's increasingly tyrannical methods. She was playing a game that could cost her everything, but the alternative was silent complicity in atrocities that violated every principle of Christian justice. Brother Pierre de Bologna's third session with the torturers pushed his broken body beyond the limits of human endurance, yet his spirit remained unbroken. The Italian knight's shoulders, permanently damaged by repeated suspension, could no longer support his weight, forcing his tormentors to devise new methods of extracting the confession that continued to elude them. Your stubbornness serves no purpose, Master Jean de Jamville observed with clinical detachment as he prepared red-hot pincers for use on Pierre's fingers. We have confessions from dozens of your brothers describing the exact practices you deny. Your silence protects no one and serves only to prolong suffering. Pierre's voice emerged as barely a whisper, but his words carried absolute conviction. My brothers spoke under torture. That would break any man. Their words mean nothing before God. The truth remains unchanged by pain. Through the stone walls of the fortress, other Templars could hear their brother's agony and continued to pray for his endurance. Brother Geoffroy de Charny's voice rose in Latin psalms that provided what spiritual comfort was possible. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In his cell above, Grand Master Jacques de Molay listened to Pierre's suffering with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Each scream felt like a dagger in his heart, but he understood that yielding to emotional pressure would betray not just his own principles, but the memory of every Templar who had died serving the Order's mission. Young Guillaume de Beaujeu, no longer the naive boy who had joined the Order seeking glory, added his voice to the prayers that carried through the fortress. Lord, grant our brother strength to endure, and grant his tormentors eventual understanding of the evil they commit in the name of justice. The prayers continued through the night, a chorus of faith that torture could wound but never silence completely. King Philip IV met with his inner council in the pre-dawn darkness, his beautiful features haggard from sleepless nights, spent calculating the political and financial costs of his increasingly desperate campaign against the Templars. The empty treasury reports spread across his table told a story of approaching bankruptcy that Templar gold was supposed to solve. The confessions multiply, but the treasure remains beyond our reach, Master Jean de Marigny reported, with the nervous energy of a man whose life depended on finding solutions to impossible problems. We have seized French properties, but their value cannot cover our debts to Flemish merchants and English creditors. Philip's pale blue eyes blazed with the fury of a predator discovering that his prey had escaped with the prize. Then we expand the operation. Every religious order with significant wealth becomes suspect of corruption. The Hospitallers, the Cistercians, wealthy abbeys, all must face investigation if they possess resources we require. Master Guillaume de Nogaret shifted uncomfortably, understanding that his king's desperation was driving him toward policies that could destroy the monarchy's relationship with the church entirely. Sire, attacking multiple religious orders simultaneously risks excommunication and European coalition against France. Brother Esquin de Floiran, whose betrayal of the Templars had purchased him a place in these councils, felt his stomach clench with horror at the scope of persecution being planned. His personal grievances against the order had seemed to justify his betrayal, but witnessing systematic expansion of religious persecution made him understand that he had helped unleash forces beyond any individual's control. The precedent has been established, Philip declared with cold calculation. Royal authority over religious orders has been accepted by papal authority. We need only apply the same methods to achieve the same results. Outside, the bells of Paris began their call to morning prayers, their bronze voices carrying across a city where religious devotion was being systematically corrupted by political ambition and financial desperation. Pope Clement V received reports that shattered the last vestiges of his ability to maintain the fiction that canonical procedure was being followed in France. Cardinal Francesco Caetani's latest intelligence from Paris described torture methods that violated every principle of Christian justice and human dignity. Your Holiness, Caetani's voice shook with barely controlled rage. They are using hot pincers on fingers and genitals, suspending men by dislocated shoulders for days, and threatening to burn prisoners alive if they maintain their innocence. This is not investigation. It is systematic sadism designed to extract any confession regardless of truth. Clement's frail hands trembled as he read the detailed reports, each description a dagger in his compromised conscience. The torture chambers of Paris had become laboratories of human suffering, and his papal bull had provided legal cover for atrocities that would have shamed pagan emperors. The Grand Master refuses to break despite suffering that has killed younger men, the Cardinal continued. His endurance has become legendary among the prisoners, inspiring them to maintain their innocence despite unimaginable agony. Bishop Guillaume de Bayonne entered with news that deepened the crisis. Your Holiness, King Philip demands a new bull explicitly authorizing torture as necessary for truth. He claims that resistance to proper investigation proves Templar guilt and papal weakness. Clement felt the walls of his moral prison closing around him. Each choice led to damnation. Authorize torture explicitly and become history's most corrupt pontiff, or refuse and watch the papacy's destruction unfold in real time. Summon Cardinal Douais immediately, he commanded. We must find a path that preserves both church authority and human dignity. Brother Geoffroy de Charnay found himself selected for special attention by Master Guillaume de Plaisillon, who recognized that breaking the preceptor of Normandy would provide powerful testimony to support the prosecution's case. The torture chamber had been prepared with particular care, including devices specifically designed to maximize psychological as well as physical pressure. Brother Geoffroy, Plaisillons began with his characteristic false courtesy. Your reputation for honesty and integrity makes your potential confession particularly valuable. Surely a man of your moral character would not maintain lies that condemn innocent brothers to continued suffering. Geoffroy stood in his chains with the same dignity he had shown commanding knights in battle, his scarred face betraying no fear despite understanding exactly what awaited him. Master Plaisillons, my reputation was built on telling truth regardless of consequences. I will not destroy that foundation to satisfy political ambition disguised as justice. The prosecutor gestured to his torturers, who began their methodical preparation of implements designed to extract screams before confessions. Your defiance will be remembered, Brother Geoffroy. But it will be remembered as stubborn pride that cost good men their lives and your order its reputation. As the first irons began to heat, Geoffroy's voice rose in prayer that carried through the stone walls to his fellow prisoners. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. Grant me strength to bear witness to truth, and grant my tormentors eventual understanding of their evil. In the cells above, his brothers heard their leader's prayer and added their own voices to the chorus. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu felt tears streaming down his face as he listened to another hero of his order prepare for martyrdom in the service of truth. The torture began with systematic precision, but Geoffroy's faith had been forged in the crucible of actual warfare and tempered by decades of genuine service to God and suffering humanity. King Edward II of England faced mounting pressure from multiple directions as reports of French torture methods reached English shores through Queen Joan's network and other sources. The young king's natural reluctance to employ such methods warred against diplomatic necessity and pressure from nobles who saw opportunity in Templar wealth. Sir Hugh Despenser the Younger brought disturbing news that crystallized Edward's dilemma. My lord, Philip has sent explicit demands that we employ proper investigative methods or face consequences for harboring heretics. He questions England's commitment to Christian orthodoxy. Edward's handsome features showed the strain of trying to balance incompatible demands. Hugh, we have questioned the Templars extensively without torture. Master William de la More maintains their innocence with convincing authority. Must we become torturers to satisfy French diplomatic pressure? Master William de la More, brought again from the Tower for consultation, stood before the Royal Council with undiminished dignity despite weeks of imprisonment. His grey eyes met the king's with calm certainty. Your Majesty, truth requires no torture to emerge. Our order's practices are documented, witnessed, and consistent with Christian tradition. Only lies require pain to extract them. Sir William Ing, Chief Justice of England, leaned forward with legal precision. Master William, if your order is innocent, why do French investigations produce such consistent confessions? Can hundreds of men be tortured into identical lies? The Templar preceptor's response carried the authority of truth. My lord, when tortured men are asked identical questions under identical threats, they will provide identical answers. Consistency in coerced testimony proves only the consistency of coercion, not the truth of statements. Edward felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. Resist Philip's demands and risk war with France at a time when Scotland remained unconquered. Comply and become complicit in what increasingly appeared to be judicial murder disguised as religious investigation. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu experienced a moment of profound spiritual clarity as he listened to Brother Geoffroy's torture through the stone walls of the fortress. The young knight who had joined the order seeking personal glory finally understood that their suffering served a purpose infinitely larger than individual ambition or even institutional survival. Henri, he called to his fellow young knight, I begin to understand why Uncle Guillaume fought at Acre even when defeat was certain. Some battles are won not by surviving, but by bearing witness to truth under impossible circumstances. Henry's voice carried new maturity, born of witnessing systematic persecution. You mean our endurance matters more than our survival? That maintaining innocence under torture serves God even if it costs our lives? From his neighbouring cell, Brother Pierre de Bologna, broken in body but not in spirit, added his wisdom to their conversation. Boys, every day we refuse to confess to lies is a day truth survives persecution. Every scream we utter while maintaining innocence is a prayer that future generations will understand what really happened here. Guillaume felt something crystallizing in his heart. Not the desperate hope for rescue that had sustained him through the early days of imprisonment, but the calm certainty that their witness would outlast their persecutors. We are writing history with our blood and our endurance. Philip may destroy our bodies and steal our wealth, but he cannot kill the truth we represent. Through the small window of his cell, Guillaume could see the spires of Notre Dame rising into the morning sky. Somewhere in that growing light, people were asking questions about the arrests, about the methods, about the true nature of the charges. Truth had a power that tyranny could wound, but never completely destroy. The sounds of Geoffroy's continued torture echoed through the fortress, but they no longer filled Guillaume with despair. Instead, they filled him with determination to ensure that such courage would not be forgotten. Master Guillaume de Nogaret brought King Philip intelligence that would reshape the entire prosecution strategy. His network of spies had finally identified the source of the warning that allowed Templars to move their treasure beyond French reach, and the revelation carried implications that terrified even the ruthless Chancellor. "Sire," Nogaret reported with unusual hesitation, "our investigation has traced the leak to papal sources in Avignon. Pope Clement himself appears to have provided indirect warning to the Grand Master through intermediaries." Philip's beautiful features transformed with a rage that made his previous anger seem mild by comparison. His pale blue eyes blazed with the fury of a predator, discovering that his supposed ally had sabotaged the hunt from within. "Clement betrays us while pretending support. The pontiff plays a double game that costs us a kingdom's worth of gold." The implications crashed over the royal council like an avalanche. If they moved against papal authority directly, they risked excommunication and the collapse of their entire legal justification for the persecution. If they ignored the betrayal, they appeared weak before every noble and merchant who had questioned the Templar prosecutions. Master Jean de Marigny shifted nervously as he considered the financial catastrophe unfolding before them. "Sire, without Templar treasure, we cannot meet our obligations to English creditors or Flemish merchants. Default on those debts could trigger international coalition against France." Brother Esquin de Floyeron, whose betrayal of the Templars had seemed to purchase safety and advancement, now understood that he had become a witness to treachery that extended far beyond anything he had imagined. The corruption he had helped expose paled beside the corruption he had helped enable. Philip's voice dropped to the dangerous whisper that those who knew him had learned to fear. If Clement wishes to play such games, he will learn that French protection comes with French obedience. No one betrays Philip the Fair without consequences. Pope Clement V found himself facing the ultimate test of his compromised papacy, as reports arrived that Philip had discovered the papal warning that allowed Templar treasure to escape France. The pontiff's chambers in Avignon had become a prison of his own making, where every decision led deeper into corruption and every attempt at righteousness risked destruction. Cardinal Francesco Caetani entered with news that made the Pope's complexion turn ashen. "Your Holiness, Philip's agents have arrested several papal couriers and extracted confessions about communications with the Templar Grand Master. The king knows of our involvement in warning the order." Clement's frail hands shook as he contemplated the approaching storm. Philip's rage when thwarted had become legendary, and discovery of papal betrayal would unleash fury that could destroy the Church's independence entirely. What demands has he made? Bishop Guillaume de Bayonne answered with visible fear. "Your Holiness, Philip demands that you issue a bull declaring the Templar treasure movement an act of heretical conspiracy. He wants papal authority to seize Templar holdings in other kingdoms and charge those who aided the treasure movement with treason against Christendom." The demand represented complete capitulation to royal authority over church affairs. Agreeing would make the papacy Philip's puppet completely, while refusing would likely result in the destruction of papal authority and Clement's own imprisonment, or worse. Cardinal Jacques Duez entered with additional pressure. Your Holiness, we have also received communications from English and Aragonese sources expressing concern about French methods and questioning papal authorization of torture. European sentiment turns against our complicity. Clement felt the weight of his choices crushing down upon him like the stones of a collapsed cathedral. Every path led to damnation, political, moral, or spiritual. The papacy that had once commanded kings now begged for survival from the very monarchs it should guide and correct. Brother Henri de Chalon, the youngest of the imprisoned Templars, found himself selected for psychological torture designed to exploit his youth and inexperience. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon had learned that physical torture often failed where emotional manipulation succeeded, particularly with prisoners whose idealism could be turned against them. Young Henri, Plaisillons began with false paternal concern, you joined our order seeking to serve God and achieve glory. Look around you. Where is the glory in this dungeon? Where is God's protection for his faithful servants? Henri's blue eyes, once bright with idealistic fervour, now showed the maturity that came from witnessing systematic persecution and heroic endurance. Master Plaisillons, I have learned that glory comes not from victory, but from maintaining truth under impossible circumstances. God's protection manifests not in preventing suffering, but in providing strength to endure it. The prosecutor circled the young knight like a predator studying prey, seeking psychological weaknesses that physical torture had failed to exploit. Your Grand Master's stubbornness condemns you all to death. Confess to lesser charges, and you may yet live to serve God in other ways. Henri's response carried wisdom that surprised even his interrogator. Master Plaisillons, I would rather die maintaining innocence than live bearing false witness. The Grand Master shows us how to honour truth, and I will follow his example regardless of consequences. Through the stone walls, the sound of continued torture echoed from other chambers, but Henri no longer felt the paralysing fear that had marked his early imprisonment. Brother Geoffroy's prayers, Brother Pierre's endurance, and the Grand Master's unbreakable will had taught him that courage could be learned and that faith could grow stronger under pressure. You may break my body, Henri declared with quiet conviction, but you cannot make me betray the truth that has sustained our order for 2 centuries. Queen Joan of Navarre made the most dangerous decision of her life, using her royal seal to send direct communication to Pope Clement V, warning him that Philip's rage over the escaped Templar treasure threatened to destroy the careful balance that kept the papacy in Avignon, rather than seeing it destroyed entirely. Lady Marguerite de Poitiers carried the sealed letter hidden in a hollowed prayer book, understanding that discovery would mean death for both queen and messenger. The communication reached Avignon through a network of abbesses and female religious who moved freely between kingdoms while remaining invisible to male political observers. Your Holiness, Joan's letter read, my husband's fury at Templar defiance has grown beyond reason or political calculation. He speaks openly of expanding persecution to all religious orders with significant wealth and of making the papacy's continued existence dependent on complete submission to royal authority. The Templar prosecution has become a test of whether church or crown will ultimately rule Christendom. The warning carried additional intelligence about Philip's financial desperation and his advisors' fear that royal bankruptcy could trigger international coalition against France. Joan revealed that Master Guillaume de Nogaret was preparing lists of wealthy abbeys and monastic houses whose investigation for heretical practices might solve the kingdom's financial crisis. In her private chambers, Joan understood that she had crossed a line from which there could be no return. if Philip discovered her communication with the Pope. Royal marriage would provide no protection from his rage. Queens had been set aside for lesser acts of defiance, and Philip's need for absolute loyalty exceeded his affection for any individual. But watching the systematic torture of religious knights had awakened something in Joan that political caution could not silence. Some principles mattered more than personal safety, and some evils required opposition regardless of consequences. Grand Master Jacques de Molay emerged from his latest torture session, broken in body, but unbroken in spirit, his grey eyes still blazing with the faith that had sustained him through months of systematic brutality. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon had employed every method in his arsenal of cruelty, yet the confession that would legitimize the entire persecution remained beyond his reach. "Your endurance becomes legendary," Plaisillons observed with frustrated admiration. "But it serves no purpose except to prolong suffering. Your brothers confess while you maintain stubborn pride." Jacques' voice emerged as barely a whisper, but his words carried absolute conviction. "Master Plaisillon, my brothers spoke, under torture, that would break any man. But God knows the truth. Our order served Christ faithfully for 2 centuries. In the cells around him, other Templars listened to their leaders' continued defiance with prayers and tears. Brother Geoffroy de Charnay, himself broken by torture but not in spirit, added his voice to the chorus of support. "Grand Master, your witness honors every brother who died serving our mission." Young Guillaume de Beaujeu, no longer the naive boy who had sought glory, understood that they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after Philip's kingdom had fallen to dust. "Master Jacques, your courage teaches us that truth has power beyond earthly destruction." Brother Henri de Chalon, transformed by witnessing heroic endurance, added his voice to the prayers that sustained their community of suffering. "Grand Master, you show us how to honor God when men fail to honor justice." Through the small windows of their cells, the Templars could see the spires of Notre Dame rising into the evening sky. Somewhere in that gathering darkness, people were beginning to understand that something monstrous was happening in the name of Christian justice, and that resistance might yet emerge from unexpected sources. King Philip IV received devastating news that his persecution of the Templars was generating international opposition that threatened to isolate France diplomatically and economically. Master Guillaume de Nogaret's intelligence network reported growing resistance across Europe, much of it organized through channels he had never thought to monitor. "Sire," Nogaret reported with unusual nervousness, "King James of Aragon has formally protested our methods in a letter to Pope Clement. King Edward delays prosecution indefinitely, citing concerns about proper legal procedure. Several German princes openly defy papal authority and offer sanctuary to fleeing Templars." Philip's beautiful features showed the strain of mounting pressure from multiple directions. The persecution that was supposed to solve his financial crisis had instead created new problems that threatened the kingdom's stability. "What of our merchant obligations? Can we delay payment to English and Flemish creditors while these political difficulties resolve?" Master Jean de Marigny consulted his ledgers with the desperate energy of a man whose life depended on finding solutions to impossible problems. "Sire, default on international debts, while simultaneously demanding Templar prosecutions, could trigger coalition against France. Our enemies would unite behind righteous cause, while we appear as brutal persecutors." The irony was not lost on anyone present. Philip's quest for Templar wealth had made him appear weak rather than strong, desperate rather than confident, isolated rather than powerful. The persecution had become a political disaster that grew worse with each passing day. Brother Escon de Floyrand, whose betrayal had seemed to purchase advancement and security, now understood that he had helped unleash forces beyond any individual's control. His treachery had contributed to a continental crisis that threatened to destroy the very kingdom he had sought to serve. "The treasure escapes our reach," Philip admitted with bitter fury, "but the precedent remains. Royal authority over religious orders has been established, whatever the immediate cost." Pope Clement V found temporary salvation in the most unlikely source. Queen Joan's warning allowed him to prepare a response that might preserve both papal authority and his own survival. Working with Cardinal Jacques Duez, he crafted a strategy that appeared to support Philip, while actually limiting royal authority over church affairs. "We issue a bull expressing concern about excessive methods while reaffirming church authority over final judgment," Duez explained to the assembled papal council. "This allows us to distance ourselves from torture while avoiding direct confrontation with Philip." Cardinal Francesco Caetani remained skeptical about any compromise with systematic persecution. "Your Holiness, how can we legitimize proceedings based entirely on tortured confessions? How can canonical tribunals judge evidence extracted through methods that violate Christian justice?" Clement's response showed the pragmatic calculation that had kept him alive in an impossible position. "Francesco, we acknowledge the investigations while insisting on proper canonical procedure for final judgment. This preserves church authority while appearing to cooperate with royal demands." Bishop Guillaume de Bayonne brought additional pressure that complicated their careful strategy. "Your Holiness, we have received reports that Philip plans to expand persecution to other religious orders. The Templar precedent could destroy monastic independence throughout Europe." The scope of the threat became clear. Philip's desperation for gold and precedent for royal authority over religious orders could reshape the relationship between church and state across Christendom. The Templar persecution was becoming a test case for whether religious authority could survive political pressure. "We must act carefully," Clement decided. Support for proper investigation combined with insistence on canonical procedure. This preserves our authority while avoiding direct confrontation that could destroy the papacy entirely. Outside, the bells of Avignon called the faithful to evening prayers, their bronze voices carrying across a city where spiritual authority struggled to survive political necessity and moral corruption. Brother Geoffroy de Charny found strength in suffering that surprised even his torturers. His faith forged stronger by the fires of persecution rather than broken by them. The preceptor of Normandy had become a symbol of unbreakable will among the imprisoned Templars, his continued resistance inspiring brothers who might otherwise have yielded to despair. "Your defiance serves no purpose," Master Jean de Joinville observed with professional frustration as he prepared instruments for another session. "We have broken younger men with half the pressure we have applied to you." Geoffrey's response came through gritted teeth, but with unshakable conviction. "My purpose is not to serve your convenience, but to serve truth. Every day I refuse to lie is a day truth outlasts persecution." Through the stone walls of the fortress, his voice rose in evening prayers that had become a rallying point for Templar resistance. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me." The Latin words carried power that torture could wound, but never destroy. In his cell, young Guillaume de Beaujeu listened to Geoffroy's prayers with tears of pride rather than despair. The boy who had joined the order seeking personal glory now understood that he was witnessing something that would echo through history: the triumph of human dignity over systematic brutality. Brother Henri de Chalon added his young voice to the prayers, his transformation from frightened boy to determined defender of truth complete. "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." The ancient words took on new meaning in their circumstances. Even Brother Pierre de Bologna, broken in body but not in spirit, managed to join the chorus from his cell. Their voices rose together through the stone corridors, carrying faith and defiance to every corner of their prison. Master Guillaume de Plaisillon faced the humiliating reality that months of systematic torture had failed to achieve the prosecution's primary objective: a confession from Grand Master Jacques de Molay that would legitimize the entire persecution. The legal foundation for seizing Templar wealth remained questionable, and international pressure was mounting against French methods. "The Grand Master's resistance has become legendary," he reported to King Philip, with barely concealed frustration. His example inspires other prisoners to maintain their defiance, despite suffering that has broken lesser men. Philip's pale blue eyes blazed with fury at the news that his primary target remained unconquered. "Then we escalate the pressure, threaten to torture younger knights in his presence, make him responsible for their suffering as well as his own." The suggestion revealed the depth of Philip's desperation and the complete corruption of any pretense to justice. Using psychological torture to exploit a leader's care for his followers represented a new depth of cruelty that shocked even hardened prosecutors. Brother Esquin de Floiron, present to provide expert testimony about Templar practices, felt his remaining conscience revolt at the proposed escalation. His betrayal of the order had been motivated by personal grievances, not by desire to witness systematic sadism disguised as justice. "Sire," Plaisillons ventured carefully, "such methods might produce confessions, but they would lack credibility even by our current standards. International observers already question our procedures." Philip's beautiful features transformed with the dangerous calm that those who knew him had learned to fear. "International observers matter nothing if we achieve our objectives. The precedent for royal authority over religious orders justifies whatever methods prove necessary." The morning sun cast long shadows through the palace windows, illuminating documents that recorded months of systematic torture in pursuit of political and financial goals that remained frustratingly beyond reach. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu stood at his cell window watching the dawn break over Paris, understanding that this might be among the last sunrises he would witness as winter approached and their captors' patience wore thin. The young knight who had entered the order seeking personal glory had found something infinitely more valuable: the peace that came from standing for truth regardless of consequences. "Henri," he called to his fellow young knight, "do you regret joining our order? Do you wish you had chosen a different path that would not have led to this dungeon?" Henri's response came without hesitation, carrying the maturity that suffering had forced upon him. "Guillaume, I regret nothing. Better to die maintaining innocence than to live bearing false witness. Our order gave us purpose worthy of any sacrifice." From his cell, Brother Pierre de Boulogne added his wisdom to their conversation, despite the pain that speaking caused his torture-damaged body. "Boys, we have witnessed something that few men see: the triumph of truth over power, of faith over fear, of human dignity over systematic cruelty." Brother Geoffroy de Charny's voice carried through the stone walls with the authority of a man who had found unshakable peace. "Brothers, whether we live or die, whether our order survives or perishes, we have proven that some things cannot be destroyed by earthly power." Through the fortress, they could hear the sounds of approaching guards making their morning rounds. Another day of interrogation and torture awaited, but the Templars faced it with dignity, born of understanding that their witness served purposes beyond their own survival. "Today may bring our final test," Guillaume observed quietly. "Let us meet it as becomes Knights of Christ, with courage, faith, and absolute commitment to truth." The morning light strengthened, illuminating men who had been transformed by suffering into something their persecutors could wound but never truly defeat. King Philip IV received the news that would finally break the deadlock in the Templar persecution, though not in the way he had hoped. Pope Clement V's latest bull, crafted in response to mounting international pressure, and Queen Joan's secret warnings effectively removed the proceedings from royal control and placed them under direct papal authority. The Pope calls for canonical tribunals in each kingdom to review evidence and render final judgment. Master Guillaume de Nogaret reported with barely concealed fury. He effectively nullifies our proceedings while appearing to support continued investigation. Philip's beautiful features contorted with rage as he understood that his carefully planned persecution was being dismantled by papal diplomacy. Clement betrays us completely. He provides legal cover for our enemies while undermining our authority. The political implications crashed over the royal council like an avalanche. Without papal support, the Templar prosecutions would appear to be purely political persecution, motivated by greed. International opposition would coalesce around a righteous cause, while France appeared as a brutal oppressor. Master Jean de Marigny brought additional devastating news about the kingdom's financial situation. Sire, without Templar treasure to cover our debts, we face default to English creditors and Flemish merchants. International coalition against France becomes inevitable. Brother Esquin de Floyrand, whose betrayal had seemed to purchase security and advancement, now understood that he had helped create a political disaster that threatened to destroy the very kingdom he had sought to serve. His treachery had contributed to a crisis that grew beyond any individual's ability to control. The precedent remains, Philip declared with bitter determination. We have established royal authority over religious orders. Future kings will use the methods we have pioneered. Outside, the bells of Paris rang the hour, marking another step in the systematic destruction of an order that had served Christendom faithfully for 2 centuries. Grand Master Jacques de Molay was brought before a hastily convened tribunal that bore all the trappings of justice while serving the purposes of predetermined persecution. After months of torture that had broken his body but not his spirit, he faced judges whose verdict had been decided before the proceedings began. Cardinal Guillaume de Bayonne, serving as papal representative, read charges that bore no resemblance to the truth of Templar practices. Jacques de Molay, you stand accused of leading an order that denied Christ, worshipped idols, and corrupted holy vows through obscene practices. The Grand Master stood in chains with dignity that torture could not diminish, his grey eyes meeting his accusers without fear. Your Eminence, I have served God faithfully for 40 years. I led this order through the loss of the Holy Land and tried to prepare for a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. I will not bear false witness against brothers who died serving Christ. Master Guillaume de Plessis presented the tortured confessions with satisfaction, knowing that their credibility mattered less than their legal utility. Grand Master, your own brothers have confessed to the practices you deny. Will you maintain lies that condemn innocent men to death? Jacques' voice carried the authority of truth despite his physical condition. Master Plessis, men broken by torture will confess to anything to end their suffering. But God knows the truth of our service, and history will judge between their forced words and our actual deeds. The tribunal's judgment was foreordained, but Jacques de Molay's final testimony would echo through centuries, inspiring future generations to question official narratives and seek truth beyond political convenience. Brother Geoffroy de Charnay stood beside his Grand Master as they faced their final moments together. 2 men who had devoted their lives to an ideal that persecution could not destroy. The execution pyre had been prepared on the Ile de la Cité, in sight of the royal palace, where Philip watched from his windows, with satisfaction at finally achieving his goals. Jacques, Geoffroy spoke quietly as they were bound to the stakes. Do you have any regrets about the path that brought us here? The Grand Master's weathered face showed peace that his torturers had never been able to break. Geoffroy, I regret only that we could not complete the mission, that Jerusalem remains in infidel hands, and our order dies before we could reclaim the Holy Land. But I regret nothing about how we lived or how we die. The crowd that gathered to witness their execution was strangely subdued, many spectators showing discomfort rather than bloodthirsty satisfaction. Word of the torture methods had spread through Paris, and popular opinion had begun to turn against the persecution. As the flames began to rise, Jacques de Molay's voice carried across the square with prophetic authority. Philip, Pope Clement, I summon you both to appear before God's tribunal within the year to answer for your crimes against innocent men. Brother Geoffroy added his own final testimony. We die as we lived, servants of Christ and defenders of truth. Let our deaths bear witness that some things cannot be conquered by earthly power. The flames consumed their bodies, but their words echoed through the crowd and beyond, carrying a message that would outlive the kingdom that destroyed them. In the watching crowd, scribes and chroniclers took careful note of their final statements, ensuring that history would remember more than the official version of events. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu stood at his cell window, watching the smoke rise from the Ile de la Cité, understanding that the execution of the Grand Master and Brother Geoffroy marked both an ending and a beginning. The young knight who had joined the order-seeking glory had witnessed the triumph of truth over power, even when that triumph came through martyrdom. In the months that followed, Philip's kingdom began to crumble exactly as Jacques de Molay had prophesied. The king died within the year under mysterious circumstances, his beautiful features twisted in final agony. Pope Clement V followed shortly after, his compromised conscience finally extracting its price. The curse of the Templars seemed to reach beyond the grave to claim those who had orchestrated their destruction. Brother Henri de Chalon, now among the few surviving witnesses to the persecution, found himself released as part of papal efforts to distance the Church from Philip's excesses. The young knight carried with him memories of heroism and endurance that would shape his understanding of faith for the rest of his life. Years later, Guillaume would write the true account of what happened in the temple dungeons, ensuring that future generations would understand the difference between the official charges and the actual events. His testimony, along with that of other survivors, would preserve the truth that torture had failed to destroy. The Knights Templar as an organization had been eliminated, but their ideal, that truth matters more than political convenience, that faith can survive systematic persecution, that human dignity transcends earthly power, lived on in the hearts of those who had witnessed their final stand. As the evening stars appeared over Paris, Guillaume de Beaujeu offered a final prayer for his fallen brothers, understanding that their deaths had purchased something more valuable than any treasure. The eternal testament that some things cannot be conquered by the corrupt machinery of earthly ambition. The ancient stones of Paris still remember those who suffered in their shadows. Though centuries have passed since the last Templar knight drew breath in the dungeons beneath the temple fortress, the wind that whispers through the streets carries echoes of prayers once spoken by broken men who refused to break, of courage that bloomed in darkness, of truth that survived the systematic assault of earthly power. Time has vindicated their witness. Philip the Fair died within the year, his golden beauty corrupted by mysterious illness that consumed him from within. Pope Clement V followed to his own judgment shortly after. His compromised soul finally extracted its price. The curse that Jacques de Molay pronounced from the flames proved more powerful than any earthly authority they had served, but the greater victory belonged not to prophecy fulfilled, but to principles preserved. In the gentle twilight of medieval Paris, where evening shadows soften the harsh edges of ancient stones, we can still sense the presence of those who chose truth over survival, faith over political convenience, human dignity over the corrupted machinery of persecution. Their white mantles bearing the red cross have long since crumbled to dust, Their swords rust in forgotten corners. Their treasure remains scattered across kingdoms that no longer exist. Yet something eternal survived their destruction. The understanding that some things transcend the reach of tyrants, that truth possesses a power beyond any earthly destruction, that human souls can achieve victories that outlast the kingdoms that attempt to crush them. The bells of Paris ring no longer for Templar knights, but they ring still for the ideals those knights died defending. In their bronze voices, carried on the evening wind across stones that have witnessed both cruelty and courage, we hear the eternal promise that truth endures, that justice, though delayed, will ultimately prevail, and that the light of human dignity can never be completely extinguished by the darkness of earthly ambition. The trial of the Templars, sex, secrets, and a king's revenge.